Good morning and welcome to the Rapid City Planning Commission meeting for March 25th, 2021. If any member of the audience wishes to speak to an item on the Planning Commission agenda, there are speaker request forms on the table along the left wall. Please fill out the request with the agenda number of the item you wish to speak to and hand it to the staff on the left of the dais. At this time, we would also like to ask that if any member of the audience has a cell phone or other electronic device, that you either turn it off or turn the ringer to silent. If you need to take a call, please step out to the hallway so that the meeting is not disrupted. Items 1 through 8 have been placed on the consent calendar today and may be approved as a group. Action will be taken on all consent items in accordance with staff's recommendation by a single vote. Any item may be removed by any planning commissioner, staff member, or audience member for separate consideration at this time. The findings of this planning commission are recommendations to the City Council. The City Council will make the final decision with the exception of the following items. Item 3, 21PD006. Item 4, 21PD007. And item 5, 21PD008. The Rapid City Planning Commission's actions on these items are final unless any party appeals that decision to the Rapid City Council. All appeals must be submitted in writing to the Department of Community Development by close of business on the 7th full calendar day following action by the Planning Commission. Are there any items 1 through 8 that staff would like removed?
No, thank you.
Are there any items 1 through 8 that any planning commissioner would like removed for separate consideration? And are there any items 1 through 8 that any audience member would like removed for separate consideration? The chair would then entertain a motion to approve items 1 through 8 in accordance with staff's recommendation. Rachel made the motion to approve items 1 through 8. And Karen seconded that motion. And I'll just note that before we take a vote, I don't have any speaker requests. We have a lot of folks in the audience, but I haven't seen any requests. All right, motion on the floor is to approve the consent calendar, items 1 through 8. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 9.
Item number 9 is 21 RZ007. And the applicant 2 weeks ago contacted our office to withdraw the application. So staff's recommendation is that Planning Commission acknowledge the withdrawal.
All right, thank you. Karen made the motion to acknowledge the withdrawal of item number 9. And Kelly seconded that motion. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 10.
Wait, here. Cool. Item number 10 here is 21 PD004, a major amendment to a planned development to reduce the front yard setback to 4.7 feet. This house is on Serendipity Lane in Chapel Lane Village. It's zoned medium density residential. It has a 20-foot front yard setback, but as you can see there, it's kind of interesting. The green space in between the house and the road is common area, so it's owned by the Chapel Lane Village Homeowners Association, and it's not anything. It's just more land in between that house and the road, and they use it in effect as a front yard, but it's not their property, which is kind of the reason for this major amendment. So as you can see, it's a sub-collector street there, which is the 20-foot setback. So this is a site plan of the existing structure. right now it has a 13.1 foot setback from the deck to the front yard line. And it's a little bit hard to see here, but right here these are the stairs to access the deck. And as you can see, they're a little skinny and a little steep. And the applicant is requesting to renovate this deck. It's almost 40 years old. And in renovating it, they want to bring the stairs out here and here to make it a little wider and a little bit of a less steep grade, just in order to help with safety concerns that the homeowners had about getting up and down their front steps there. So this is kind of a quick mock-up that the developer did of what the new steps to the deck will look like. And as you can see, it cuts further into that front yard setback. But it does so in order to make the steps a little bit more accessible. So this is a full construction plan of what the deck will look like with those steps. And this is a front elevation. We asked them to include this just to kind of show how unobtrusive the deck and stairs will be to people using the street. And so this is what it looks like currently. As you can see, the steps are a little iffy. And this is a frontal view of the house. So even though the front lot line is about 13 feet from the end of that deck, you can see that there's still a lot of driveway and yard that, although it's technically not their property, is kind of in effect, that serves as the front yard for that house. So I went out recently to take site photos, and this is standing in their driveway, facing to the north and facing to the south. And this is another look at the front of the house. So if they bring the steps out, as they're proposing to do, by about 9 feet, they'll still be about 25 feet from the road, which won't cause any sight triangle issues or obstruct drivers or pedestrians in any way. And so as such, staff recommends approval of this major amendment to the plan development with stipulations, one of the stipulations being an exception to allow front yard setback of 4.7 feet.
Thank you, Marty. Questions for staff at this point? Do you wish to speak on this item?
We just wanted to replace the deck because it's falling apart.
I'm sorry. If you could, there's a microphone over where Marty's at. Maybe identify yourself and just say that.
I'm Dan Miller, the owner of the property here. We just had visitors that wanted to know whether we were trying to kill them or not with the deck. And the deck is not in good shape, so all we're trying to do is just replace that deck, same size and everything else, with something that won't hurt anybody.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Oh.
This looks like.
And here's the guy we hired to build it.
So I'm Stephen Hayes. I'm the actual hired contractor to do this. I am for the most part, a full-time deck builder. When Dan and Bernice came up to me, they said, hey, we need a new deck. I went and looked at it and said, how old is it? 41 years old. What? So in the deck industry, decks last about 20 years. Around here, because of our drier climate, I have found out that decks come really easy off the house when they're about 30 years old. This one is 41. I have yet to tear down a deck that was 41 years old. I've gone up to it. Have any of you guys gone to the property? Okay. So if you go up to the actual deck and you touch it, it is going to come down super easy. Super easy. So it needs replaced because it is a huge safety issue. The other thing is the access into the house. Why are we changing the stairs? Because there isn't good access into the house. To get anything, a couch or a refrigerator into the house, you either have to go up and around the hill, which, if you can see, is not the easiest thing to do, which eliminates half of the year because of snow and rain. And So, and because you go up these set of stairs, and then you have to go around a railing that's not very wide, and then up to a split set of stairs. So it is extremely hard to get anything into the house. So that's the proposal on changing the stairs, is to make it easier access into the house. And then we're obviously looking at a huge safety issue with the age of the deck. Okay?
Thank you. Commissioner Heikus?
Looks like it's time for a new deck.
Yes.
I do have one question. Can we see your elevations? Do you have a deck elevation plan? Just one question about the balusters. Sorry. I'm going to get a little OCD. Yeah, looks like those are complying with the not allowing a 4-inch sphere to pass. Is that correct?
The railing is Trek signature railing, so it's all compliant by them.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry I didn't thank you, but I'm going to move approval. So.
All right. Eric moved approval of item number 10. Is there a second? Other Eric. Sorry, Eric.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
if the motion maker would do a friendly amendment to move approval with the stipulations, granting the exception to reduce the front yard setback.
Move approval with stipulations, granting the front yard setback requirement. The
Work for
front
the
yard
second.
setback reduction.
Okay, works for the second on that too by Eric Ottenbacher. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 11.
Morning. Item number 11 is 21 UR 002. It's a major amendment to a conditional use permit to allow a group home. This is property that's located on the southwest corner of North 1st Street and Denver Street, just east of the Journey Museum. The reason this is a major amendment is we saw it as a conditional use permit in 2018. It was file number 18 UR 001, conditional use permit to allow a group home. But they did not get a building permit or start the use within 2 years, and after 2 years, a conditional use permit expires. So they're here renewing that conditional use permit in order to get started. And this is Passages Women's Transitional Living, a group home. What they're proposing to build is a 6,222 square foot home which will house 14 women and 1 staff member. Currently, the site is void of any structural development. It's zoned medium-density residential district, as are properties to the north and south. And then we have a unique one civic center on either side to the east and west. Here we have future land use. I believe that's public, quasi-public in this area. Yeah. And then looking at a major street plan, see what's in the area. We have North Street to the north as a collector street, and then to the east, and we have East Boulevard and North 5th Street to the west, and Omaha to the south. So good circulation in this area. Same building layout as the original application. We have the building in the dark shading. And then on the west side of the property is 15 parking spaces, so that's 1 per resident, and then there's a garage space for the staff member. They've indicated that the women typically don't have vehicles, but they do have staff meetings at this location, so they will need that parking and are proposing to provide that parking. One thing that did change on this was the location of the 100-year floodplain, which is located on the property, and the applicant is aware that they'll need a floodplain development permit before getting a building permit. Landscape plan shows landscaping and compliance. There isn't any signage proposed for this property because of the nature of the use. Don't want to really advertise who's living there. But it does fit in, the building style fits in with the neighborhood. Here we are looking at the property from basically the corner of North 1st Street and Denver. And looking back, you can see the Journey Museum in the distance, but also some other residential in the area. Looking south into the property from Denver Street and some more residential, looking towards the intersection to the east. And there you can see East North Street and the train tracks and in the distance, looking a little bit to the north and east. And then residential to the north on the north side of Denver Street. And then looking back towards 5th Street and the Journey Museum and the Civic Center in that area. This is a project we're very much behind. It's infill development in this area. It's housing for a special needs group. So this is a wonderful project, and like I said, the only reason we're seeing this is because the original conditional use permit expired. But we're glad we got to see it again and bring it before you, and staff's recommendation is to approve with the stipulations noted in the staff report. I believe the applicant is here if you have any specific questions about the operation of the facility.
Thank you, Fletcher. Any questions for him or the applicant? Anybody have a motion then? All right. Karen made the motion to approve item number 11 with the stipulations as noted, and Rachel seconded that motion. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 12.
Good morning. Give me a second to load this up here. There it is. Good morning. Item number 12 is a presentation and discussion of the strategic housing plan for Rapid City. This document is looking at policies to help the city guide opportunities for housing with kind of a specific look at affordability, meaning a lot of different things which we'll talk about. This plan builds on many years of work. It builds on the city's adopted 2014 comprehensive plan. It builds on the affordable housing policy that the city council adopted in 2019. And beyond that, it builds on many, many years of grassroots community initiatives as well. A lot of different entities and stakeholders coming together to work collaboratively to look at housing issues. And I'm talking about collective impact as well as other housing initiatives that have been going on in the community in recent years. So specifically, this document is looking at what are some strategies that the city can implement in order to create but also preserve the housing stock that we have in Rapid City. And we're looking at housing needs across a broad spectrum of the community. So really looking at needs for a broad array of income earning households. My objective today in presenting this plan is to provide as brief of an overview of the document as I can, and then leave time at the end for discussion and feedback among the Planning Commission, with the ultimate goal of bringing back 2 ordinances for approval by the City Council and Planning Commission, as well as the final version of the plan with any changes that we need to make. So one of the first questions that usually arises when we're talking about housing, and particularly affordable housing, is what do you mean by affordable? And there are a lot of terminology that gets used by the organizations and stakeholders excuse me, involved in housing. So I want to start with that. There's a lot of terms. You hear affordable, accessible, attainable, workforce housing. And what this plan tries to do is really to encapsulate a lot of those terms. So we've used the phrase strategic housing to talk about this plan, really identifying that we have many housing needs in the community, and we're trying to be as comprehensive as possible in looking at what those needs are, and use strategies to kind of meet several goals, different areas of the housing market at once. There is sort of a common definition, though, that we're basing this discussion on, which is a definition created by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and that's based on the idea that if a household spends more than 30% of their income on housing and utilities, and they have difficulty affording other necessities, then they're housing cost burdened, and that's what we're trying to do is reduce the number of households in the community who are housing cost burdened. So Rapid City is not the only community that struggles with housing affordability. It's actually a that's a problem that's pervasive in most communities in the United States. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There are many, dozen or more factors that really play into the cost of housing, the cost to build housing, the cost to maintain it and operate it, and thusly the cost to purchase it or to rent it. So these factors become even more complicated when you consider that in and of themselves, they begin to influence one another over time. There's a lot of interrelated issues here. So, solving housing problems is certainly not simple, and there's also not one single solution, but rather this is about how the city and the community needs to kind of work together collaboratively to create more housing and preserve the housing that we do have. So to try to simplify it a little bit, this plan is really focusing on what are the specific areas the city has the most opportunity to make the most meaningful impact. So of all the items on the slides here, there's a few that we can focus on. Mostly our regulatory environment and the different ways that impacts housing cost to develop housing. And we also have a couple other opportunity areas, other funding tools. So if there's some funding that the city can dedicate, or if we can help entities leverage funding more effectively, there's some opportunities there. And lastly, with transportation and mobility, looking at public transit and also land use associated with locating housing opportunities near job opportunities and where people can find their basic needs. So the next few slides are going to introduce just a few pieces of data looking at Rapid City's housing market, and there's certainly a lot more data in the plan if you're interested in looking at that. And one sort of starting point, data point to look at would be this concept of area median income. So in Rapid City, 2018, 2019, it's about $50,000. Half of households in Rapid City make more than $50,000 and half make less than $50,000. So $50,000 per year is our median area income. And a study conducted in 2018 by Benchmark Data Labs identified that up to 25% of households in Rapid City are housing cost burdened. And if you're a renting household, you're more likely to be affected by that. Housing cost burden impacts renting households disproportionately than it does to owner-occupied households. So this graphic is depicting kind of a wider range of housing topics, and then starts to link some of the strategies in the plan to those areas. So we'll look at this a little bit more closely, kind of break it up piece by piece. So the bottom layer here, this represents the entirety of the housing market based on income, and again, kind of based on the idea of median income. So here we have, that the middle of the market is right here. All of these terms you'll start to see kind of come back again. We've got workforce housing, the idea of public housing, transitional housing, and homeless and emergency housing, and this is all kind of situated around what the middle of the market is in terms of income. Now, there's a housing study that was created in 2018 that I referenced earlier that identified the need for 3,500 units between $500 and $900. So that's kind of in this area. Oops. But the important thing to note about that is that those types of housing units require a very high level of subsidization, both to build the housing, but also to operate and maintain it. So while we observe that fact and we identified in this plan, we also need to be aware that those housing needs are very difficult to meet without a high level of subsidization. The housing plan also looks at the middle of the market, kind of in this area, and notes that there's a lot of competition for housing in this area. And we have some people who can afford a little bit more housing, and if they could move up out of that housing, it would create more opportunities and sort of less competition in that portion of the market. So, in Rapid City, we have housing needs at the lower end of the market, but there also is a lot of need in the middle of the market and what we kind of call workforce housing. this slide looks at some of the housing providers that you'll recognize and some of the development incentives that are associated with helping to build housing. And the important thing to note about these options, these opportunities, is that there's a lot of competition for them. There's sort of unmet needs with some of these financial programs. Just to give one example, the Section 8 waitlist is over 3,000 individuals. So while there are opportunities and financial programs geared at meeting some of these needs, there's certainly more work left to be done. So lastly, these are the series of 7 strategies in the plan that we'll talk about, and this graphic tries to look at what does this plan mean by strategic? We're trying to create strategies that are creating opportunities along the entire spectrum of housing in Rapid City. So there's 7 that we'll go through. I'll take a few minutes to go through those right now. The first strategy lays out a work plan for the city to make land use regulations that would support housing affordability, but also housing diversity and housing choice. And you can kind of think of this as sort of a 3-phased approach. We've got step 1. We have an ordinance that's in draft form already that we'd like to bring forward in the near future if we have support for this ordinance. And this is an ordinance which would expand the options for the administrative zoning exception. So as you may be aware, there's already a provision in our zoning code which allows an administrative exception up to 20%. We would like to expand the use of this tool for land use flexibility up to 40% for affordable housing projects defined as it's listed on the screen. So this really is looking at sort of the lower level of the market. So we'd say if you have 6 or more units, so multifamily development, if you're willing to certify income limits and rent limits and have a 15-year affordability period, and if at least 20% of your units are at 50% AMI or 40% at 60% AMI, you would be eligible for this zoning administrative exception up to 40%. And a quick note about how this criteria was determined. Most likely, developers who are meeting these income thresholds and meeting this criteria are going to be using other funding sources, such as those offered by the South Dakota Housing Development Authority. And so most likely they are meeting those targets which are in line with those programs already. So there actually may be higher thresholds required by those entities. But this is sort of what we would be looking for in terms of if the city is going to grant this exception for affordable housing, what's the public benefit of the housing that's being provided? And I hope that at the end of the presentation we can talk about this more in detail, and I look forward to your questions about this. Moving forward, the second step that we can take then is to make smaller sort of individual code updates. For example, we're also working on a small home zoning district that we'd like to bring forward in the near future. And there are other sort of quick updates or relatively quick updates that we can make to our existing zoning code. So whereas the administrative zoning exception would be something that would be a project by project change to our land use regulations, step 2 really is looking at whole districts or whole neighborhood areas and where we can create more opportunities for land use flexibility. And then lastly, once we've had some time to see how number 1 and number 2 are going, long term we need to make sort of more comprehensive updates to our zoning code. And if you'd like to look more into this, actually there's an entire section in our comprehensive plan called Zoning Diagnosis. And that section looks at how we can make our zoning code more user-friendly and also meet other goals such as housing, walkability, sustainable growth, those types of goals. So there's sort of our 3-phase approach to how we can revise our land use regulations to meet our housing goals. The second strategy in the plan looks at supporting a newly created funding tool called the Rapid City Strategic Housing Trust Fund. And this is a financing tool with the goal of supporting low to medium income households by offering loans that are either 0 interest or low interest. So this is a revolving loan fund that's spearheaded by the Black Hills Area Community Foundation. And this strategy really is kind of focused on that topic of workforce housing. So if it helps to imagine the types of households that this program would benefit, you can think of hospitality workers, which are a large segment of our workforce here, wait staff, teachers, building maintenance staff, construction workers, hairstylists. Think of those people in your lives and think of how the Strategic Housing Trust Fund could help to create more housing opportunities in that portion of the market. So the Strategic Housing Trust Fund is in the process of earning capital that they can use to support these initiatives, and they are looking to the city to see what kind of financial assistance may be available, either through a budget, like a line item in the budget, through vision funds, or some other creative strategy that the city council may have. So we'll be continuing to have these discussions with the city council to look at funding this trust fund, providing funding for the trust fund. The third strategy in the plan is for a rental registration program, and in essence, this would require that every rental property register with some kind of managing entity, be it the city, be it Pennington County Health and Human Services, or some other entity. And they would provide basic information, just a little bit of information really, where they're located, a contact person, and perhaps the number of units. And what this program does is to help create a strong two-way communication between the city and some of these entities, to be able to share information and resources, and also to have a better understanding of the rental supply in Rapid City. Now, during the pandemic we've been going through this year, an idea like this actually has kind of been tested at some level, because there was a list of property owners and property managers developed in sort of an ad hoc fashion, and was used to get information about COVID relief out to these property managers. So that was, an interesting way to kind of see the benefit of how a registration system like this could be a great communication tool and build stronger connections between local government and the providers of housing. Another example recently came up when the city looked at changing requirements for utility billing. So if we had a good way to reach out to a great number of property owners and managers, we can be very proactive in looking at policy changes and have good communication there. So there's a lot of unanswered questions about this and how exactly this program would unfold, but the basic idea is that we can work towards having some kind of registration system like this. And then as a complement to item 3, or as a standalone, this idea is about being proactive and taking sort of a different approach with code enforcement. This would require that every rental unit in the community be inspected for minimum housing standards. So we're talking about really the bare bones basics for livable housing units. Do you have running water? Are there locks on your door so that you can have security in your home? Looking at the absence of extreme mold and pests and those kind of items. So, of all the recommendations in the plan, I might say that this one is sort of in the earliest phases of development. This suggestion requires quite a lot more public involvement and meeting with stakeholders about how we could set this up. But the benefits of this program, though it wouldn't create housing, really kind of gets to the livability and quality of the housing stock in Rapid City, and could help improve housing conditions in its own way. It's something that needs to be looked at further, kind of weighing costs and benefits. A program like this really would require additional training, staff, and resources by the city. So we have a model ordinance that we can look at and some case studies from other communities, but the idea is to begin to consider something like this. Strategy number 5 is about a building permit fee waiver. I mentioned 2 ordinances. The first, which was the zoning exception. This is the second ordinance. And what this would do is it would waive building permit fees for projects that are funded by partners that you see listed up on the screen. In talking about this, we've discussed the option of waiving the building permit fee, but then having the developer pay for inspections. So what this does is it reduces the cost of their building permit fee by about 80 to 90%. And one thing to note is that building permit fees in Rapid City are really not all that expensive. We haven't increased our rates in quite some time. So the actual dollar amount impact of this strategy might be relatively low, but it still offers benefits that are worth considering. So for example, if you're a developer applying for funds from the South Dakota Housing Development Authority, your application is going to ask you if you have any local matching support. And the Housing Authority, in reviewing this draft ordinance, has indicated that if the city approves this, they would be willing to grant points to an applicant because of this building permit fee waiver being in place. So it helps to kind of reward developers who are leveraging other funds and trying to make the most efficient use of their capital. And at the highest level, it also just kind of sends a signal of support that the city is looking at options for affordable housing, and it kind of sends this this notion to the development community that we want to be a player in the affordable housing area to the extent that we're able to. So this item, like I said, is in a draft ordinance form, and we would like to bring that forward if there is support for it. Number 6 looks at the link between housing cost and transportation. For many families, your transportation cost is your second highest source of your spending. And so as we continue to make our plans, land use and transit needs to continually be a part of the discussion about housing. And fortunately, actually, there is a planning process that will be kicking off very soon within Long Range Planning Department, and that is to update the transit development plan. The contract is currently in negotiations for this right now, and so this project will be taking place throughout the next year. So that planning process really will yield more suggestions and recommendations about how we can create a strong connection between housing and transit. And this transit plan isn't looking solely at housing, but in scoping the project, looking at housing and affordability issues was one of the major goals for the outcomes of the project. And lastly, Strategy 7, this actually isn't in the written document, but these are some discussions that have been happening more recently over the last several weeks, and so something we're considering adding into the final plan. And this looks at expanding the role of our community development block grant program. Each year, this division deploys about $500,000 in funds from HUD to local projects, some of which are specifically geared towards affordable housing. So this option looks at, if the city were to have some small portion of funding that they could dedicate to enhance these projects that are already funded, we could sort of further leverage these federal funds that we have. So in the short term, looking at a potential line item supplement to the CDBG program, and then long term, are there other ways that this division can be kind of more proactively involved and continuing to develop stronger partnerships with the development community. So I'm about to wrap up here. I just want to close by going back to this graphic and just emphasizing the fact that the city alone can't solve housing affordability issues, but we do have a major role to play, and the areas where we can have the most influence as local government is in looking at our regulatory environment and looking at how we can be strategic about deploying funds, either funds that, the limited amount of resources that the city can put towards a project, or how we can help developers leverage other funds that are available to them. So, quick note on kind of where we'd like to go with this next. The City Council will receive the same presentation coming up in April. We'd like to bring the draft ordinances forward for public review, and then finally work on revising the plan and bringing that back. And then at that time, we'd like to work on implementing some of the other short-term and long-term priorities moving into the summer and beyond. I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I will take any questions you may have and look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate the presentation and explanation of all those items. Eric Ottenbacher has the first light up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you revisit the administrative zoning exceptions? I'm just unclear as to what you mean by going from 20 to 40% and.
Yes. Okay, that's great. So if an applicant for a project needs some kind of relief from the zoning regulations, they can't make parking, or their setbacks aren't quite working with the project in order to get it to work right, or they don't have enough open space, you all are familiar with some of the process that they come to for public review. They apply for a variance, they apply for multiple variances together and the plan development. You guys are accustomed to seeing those. But there's another option that happens called an administrative exception. And that's where if it's really a sort of a minor adjustment to the plan that needs to be made in order to meet the zoning requirements, we can look at that at the staff level. So right now, the sort of quantitative threshold for how we measure what kind of change is needed is 20%. So for example, if you can't meet your parking requirement, if the change you need only reduces the amount of parking you need by 20% or less, that's something we can look at, approve administratively, so it doesn't have to go to a public hearing. So that saves time, energy, process for the applicant, and it really saves everyone's time actually as well. So what this administrative exception would do would increase that threshold only for projects that have this really incredible affordable housing outcome for the public. So increasing from a maximum of 20% to a maximum of 40% for standards in the zoning code such as parking, lot size, building height, those types of things. Landscaping requirements. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Vince?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I appreciate the information and the presentation, and I don't want to conflate affordable housing and workforce housing and so forth. But you said that when we talked about the median income, you pointed out the halfway mark. Do we know how many people are on either side of those of that halfway?
Yeah, let me pull up. This may sort of get your question in a roundabout way. So these percentages here are the percentage of households that fall within these categories. So for example, in Rapid City, 13% of households earn 0 to 30% of the median. And 22% of households earn 30 to 80%. And then you can follow the graphic forward that way. Is that getting at your question, Vince?
Okay. Okay, so that's strictly households, not people, not individuals.
Correct, yeah. A lot of the data around this topic is kind of focused on the household unit, which could be a household of one person, but also a household of multiple people.
And what is that the best indicator of for future plans?
What is it the best indicator of?
Right.
Well, from a practicality standpoint, a lot of the housing programs that are set up use this metric kind of as the baseline. So the housing market in Rapid City is going to be different from the housing market in Sioux Falls. So you kind of look at what is the median, so what is the middle of the market, and then kind of situate your housing goals around how far below the middle you are, or how far above the middle you are.
And you mentioned the county 5-year affordable housing, what was it, the 5-year tax abatement?
Yes.
How does that work?
The county is the best source of information on that, so I'll do my best to speak for that program, but I may need to follow up with you on that. But they have affordability criteria in place, and if you meet those criteria, then your development can receive a property tax break. So I believe it's set up so it's a 5-year program. So the first year you don't pay your increase in property taxes after developing property. And then the second year you pay only 20%. And then the third year you pay, so it sort of gives you time to recoup some of your investment.
Okay, thank you.
Kelly?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments and then one question. Really powerful and comprehensive presentation, Sarah. I was reading this thing last week and obviously went through it again today, and it just, anybody that's been in that middle or lower income bracket knows how hard it is to make ends meet, and housing stock is limited in Rapid City, and the rents are high. I mean, I was shocked at how high the rentals prices were when I moved back home a few years ago. So anything the city can do is a real boon to this market. I'm really impressed with how, you can go down the list, every bullet point on here seems really viable and effective if it were to be put in place. My question is how many bullet points in this presentation contrast with the current strategic housing plan? I mean, this stuff seems really, really powerful and effective. Is this, a lot of this stuff new to the scene, or is this sort of piggybacked onto the existing housing plan?
The answer is both. A lot of the zoning and land use regulations sort of already have a foundation laid for them in the comprehensive plan, so we're not really going too crazy with innovation there. I mean, these are really looking at best practices used by cities all over the country to retool their zoning regulation. So that's a common practice. Some of the other recommendations in the plan, like the proactive rental inspection, for example, to my knowledge, that isn't in the city's comprehensive plan, so that kind of is a newer idea. So what we've tried to do is create a couple of, to use the buzzword, the quick wins. So we have the building permit fee waiver and the zoning administrative exception that we'd like to bring forward and adopt as soon as possible if there's support. And then but there are more visionary or sort of long-term recommendations in the plan as well. So we've tried to sort of have both.
Sure. And you know, you look at the housing inspection, that's, nobody loses from that. You know, the waiving the building permit fee, it's not a huge moneymaker, but it's a signal that the city is in partnership with, you know, finding affordable housing. Lastly, has any thought been given to, I guess, rehabbing and refurbishing existing homes up to a certain standard versus new construction?
I think that's a way that some of the funding tools that are available can make an impact, whether it's through the Strategic Housing Trust Fund, a program that they might have. And actually our very own community development block grant program is working on that to some extent already. Would like to expand on that with the Neighborhood Lift program. And Michelle, if I need to add anything, or if there's anything you want to add to that. Here. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Eric Hikas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a great presentation, Sarah. It's also profound. So construction is super volatile right now. I think those of us in the business are seeing material costs raised about 40% in the past 6 months, and now the price of housing has gone up in 20 to 30% recently in the past 6 months. This is the kind of thinking that we need, I think, to be prepared for what's coming. I think Kelly asked the question pretty clearly, but maybe we could just revisit it. And we mentioned rents, but any discussion as to the recent raise in housing cost or sales? I mean, we've seen housing jump from $160 a square foot to $220 a square foot in the past 6 months. I notice a lot of people are moving here, obviously, but any discussion as to that issue? I mean, are we bailing the ship with a bucket, or are we bailing it with a pump, I guess, you know, so.
Yeah, it's an important question. You know, this plan, the drafting stage of this plan had already begun prior to the pandemic beginning. So we know we had housing issues prior to 2020. We already had shortages, and actually our building permits, our annual building permits have just been going up and up. We really are building a lot of housing, but the sentiment that I'm hearing is that we're still not keeping up with the need, and the in-migration that we're seeing now is certainly exacerbating that only further. So I think it is a part of our discussion. I think it's a part of the why behind this plan, and why we need to act as soon as we can on doing whatever it is we can.
Mr. Chair, could I continue?
Please.
So what I've been researching lately is modular housing, and I think it cuts the construction schedule almost by 50%. Not so much manufactured housing, but modular. There may be an answer there, Sarah, too. You know, we're assembling kits rather than stick building houses. So if we need to expedite that schedule, so thank you.
Eric Ottenbacher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the strategic fund, am I getting that correct? And that's a privately funded trust fund, but there's some consideration for city or state dollars going into that as well?
That's exactly correct. It is it's spearheaded by the nonprofit organization Black Hills Area Community Foundation, who sort of acts as the managing entity in terms of, you know, managing the bank account. But there is an advisory board that expands the stakeholdership much beyond just that foundation alone. That advisory board actually has 3 city representatives on it. It's Michelle Schulke with CDBG, myself, and the planning director, Vicki Fisher, all serve on that board as well. There's Pennington County has representatives on that board, some local developer stakeholders. So the advisory board's kind of the visioning committee behind that is drawing from a much greater viewpoint than the foundation alone. And they're looking at raising funds from not just local government and county government, but they are also going and speaking with philanthropists, and they're going after grant money, and they're working on legislation to get funding. So really, you know, trying to get funds from anywhere that's possible. They're working really hard at that. Liz Hamburg with Black Hills Area Community Foundation is here as well today, if you have any questions specifically more about that.
And with those funds, those are going to be, the requirements for use of those funds will be, the stipulations will be brought up by the trust fund themselves, and no city input other than the couple of people on the board. Is that correct?
I think that's correct to say. The trust fund is very transparent and open about the targets that they're trying to meet. They're looking at workforce housing, so looking at 80% to around 100% or 115%, with some set-asides specifically for the kind of the lower end of that. But overall, the goal of the trust fund is to be able to use funds sort of efficiently and creatively. Everyone who is involved in developing affordable housing, is very appreciative of the funds that are available at the state level and the federal level. But those funds do come with a lot of red tape and a lot of processes, and they can be difficult to put together, specifically if you're a developer who's not kind of specifically focused on working on affordable housing. So this housing trust fund hopefully will help to create a path for other developers to start to do more affordable housing, even if that's not the main focus of their business.
And thank you for the presentation. I really appreciated it. Thank you.
Karen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sarah, this was a very comprehensive plan that you put together, and I appreciate all the information that you're giving to us. I think all the strategies are appropriate. The one that I am concentrating on more is the regulations that you're those changes that you're thinking of. I know as the housing market goes up and the costs go up, as Eric Hike has mentioned, we start off with a house that you can rent for fairly cheap, and now it's probably double that. And as time goes on, it keeps going up and up and up, and it's like we're always chasing something. My thought was on the regulatory things that we want to look at what our community looks like in the future, not just today. And I know at the last Planning Commission meeting, we talked about what we want to see our houses look like, and instead of having no front yards, those kinds of things. And it all comes down to that land use regulation step. And I'm curious to know in the future what we're going to do to change some of the land use regulations. And I know some of them need to be changed. There's a lot of things that we do that don't fit. It's not a cookie cutter thing. Everybody's got something different. If you look at West Boulevard and how those houses were built years ago and those kinds of things. So I think that's appropriate to look at those land use regulations. I just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the community. And so when those ordinances come forward to make those changes, I'll probably look at those pretty carefully. So my question to you in response is the one ordinance that you want to bring forward about loosening up one of the regulations. Could you explain that to me exactly what that ordinance would do?
That's the administrative exception?
Yes.
Yes.
Is that 40%, 20%?
It is.
Is that the only thing that you're going to bring forward, just that one item?
There's that ordinance, and then the building permit fee
Yeah.
waiver. However, that's an amendment to Chapter 15. So I understand Planning Commission doesn't review Chapter 15. Okay. So
Okay.
the ordinance coming back to you all will be this administrative zoning exception. So we'll bring the full ordinance forward and have a presentation specifically on that item.
Okay, that was my question. I just didn't know if you were going to have something besides that on the land use one.
Yeah,
So-
that'll be the first one. And then we have sort of several others on deck that we can hopefully bring forward as soon as possible as well.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. That's my answer to my question.
Rachel?
Thank you, Sarah, for the presentation. It's been, I really appreciate this, this movement that I think Rapid City is going towards, more livable communities, for everybody. And I think it's just so essential if we want to move forward, just for everyone, not just for the people at these income levels. I really appreciated the infographic where you lined up different professions with income levels and housing needs. I think that's a fantastic graphic, and I think really, really illustrates the point. You know, anyone who has a teenager right now knows that everybody is saying, go in the trades. You know, it's so many jobs in the trades, but then when you start looking at what the trades are paying for, there's still a housing shortage for them. So we're telling kids to go in the trades, but they're not going to be able to afford to live here. You know, that's it's kind of a big deal. And it's a big deal simply for people not to have shelter no matter what their job is. But that's something that just kind of stands out to me is how are you telling people to get this job and work towards this, but there's no way for it to actually be livable in our community. So I thought that was really powerful. I appreciate the registration of I think that's really, really essential. I think anyone who's lived in kind of the lower income, rental units have seen some very interesting things. And I think landlords have too, so I think any sort of ability to, sorry, I'm out of breath for some reason, any sort of ability to facilitate conversations in an objective way, I think is really, really essential, for rentals. And then I also want to ask a question about code enforcement, because I have friends who feel that code enforcement has been used as a tool against them in a racist way. And not saying that the city is racist, but that because code enforcement is something that you receive a complaint and then you respond to the complaint, it can be used in a way to target certain people. And I'm wondering if there's any way, any sort of process that we can add to this that would help alleviate that a little bit, simply because, shelter is a human need, and if someone's attacking your ability to live somewhere, even if it's, disproven and again and again and again, that's a continual stress on your life. And it can actually get you kicked out of apartments, even if there's no validity to the claims. So is there any potential to, to address that problem?
Well, first of all, I just want to, acknowledge what you say. That is a great stressor for families and who are experiencing that. And it's also the way that our code enforcement team is set up, the way the city has tasked them to operate is that way. And the model of being reactive to complaints is a model used, it's sort of the traditional model for communities. That's how most communities are looking at code enforcement issues. Our code enforcement team has been the same size for a long time, and they really do a lot of important work in the community, and they do it with a small team of staff. So I want to definitely give them credit for the work that they do in the community and in enforcing our codes and regulations. And then I think where the housing piece of it comes in, because right now it's actually somewhat separate issues from my perspective, I guess, and just thinking about this question the first time. The recommendation in the plan about proactive rental inspection really would be kind of a completely different way of using code enforcement tools that we currently actually don't have in place. Right now, our code enforcement team looks at issues like snow on sidewalks and grass and weeds and junk vehicles, and that's how our codes are set up. So they do a good job of enforcing the regulations that are currently on the books, and this other strategy would be kind of a different way of looking at it and using resources differently to kind of get more to the building and housing aspects. So I want to make sure I answered your question, but I also just want to see if there's anything else related to that I need to add. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I know it feels a little bit off base, for strategic housing, but at the same time, if you are being threatened to, if you are living under the threat of being kicked out of the property where you live, I mean, that is a barrier to affordable housing. And it may be based on things that you do, but there's, I've talked to people who it's not based on anything that they've done. It's simply because they have neighbors who don't like them for certain reasons.
Yeah,
so-
and I don't want to speak for our code enforcement staff, but in conversing with them in the past, I think they feel the discomfort of that as well. You know, I've had conversations, you know, they hear from tenants who are in these extremely unlivable situations and they don't know what to do about it, and code enforcement actually isn't a mechanism that can get involved just from the tenant standpoint. You know, they're like, well, my landlord, you know, is not upkeeping this property, I don't have windows in my house, like what can I do? So I think it's part of the community that they work with and see regularly as well, and would also like to have some more tools in their toolbox to be more proactive, and then really focus on the things that have the most impact and take away some of that discriminatory practice that happens when it's strictly a reactive model. You bring up a very good point.
Thank you, sir.
All right, don't have any more lights up, so I'll chime in. This is a topic that is very close to my heart and what I'm interested in. I don't think we as a community can thrive unless we can provide secure housing for as many of our citizens as we can. And the one thing that it's hard to talk about, but the one thing the city can do on the regulatory side is look at increasing density, is look at taking land that is served appropriately by water, sewer, streets, and raise the amount of people that can live on that land. That doesn't, as long as the utilities and the streetscape is in place to handle that, it doesn't cost the city any more money, but it does reduce the cost of the land in a per unit basis. And I think that we are at the point where, you know, 55 square miles, we've expanded pretty well out. We need to think about density. Then the other part of this that I harp on this all the time, and it's not, I want to take nothing away from the topics brought up. These are all ways to attack the high costs in housing, but the difference that we're talking about, and I'll just use workforce housing as an example, a $15 an hour wage gets you to $31,000 a year gross. At that 30%, and I think the 30% of income is supposed to include utilities, that's $780 a month max to hit 30%. And that doesn't buy you a lot, including utilities in Rapid City. So there, unfortunately, what we're dealing with is a difference that to build something to rent for that, you know, you're 30%, 40% different in what it takes to make those projects work. And there isn't enough support from the federal government through low-income tax credits to fill that gap. And so every day that gap increases. And I always sound negative when I say these things, but I want to make sure that we all acknowledge that fact and not get caught up in making small changes while we every day lose the battle. And I guess one thing I'll point out that I recently learned is that the county is looking at reassessing all multifamily housing with the intent of raising the assessments to get to what they consider to be market value. And I don't think that there's in general, I would say that they're probably right. If you sold a existing multifamily property, it would probably sell for more than the assessment. But if that raises taxes, we're going in the wrong direction in general. And I want to make sure that as we contemplate affordable housing and what we can do, that we, again, don't focus on the wrong things while we're losing the battle again in other ways every day. But thank you, Sarah. This is a good step to have these discussions and make sure that we get input from a wide range of people that have better ideas than me. So thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions, comments on this one? The recommendation from staff is to approve the introduction, discussion, and acknowledgement of the draft strategic housing plan. Is there a motion to do so? Vince made the motion to do that, and Rachel seconded that motion. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, discussion items, staff items today?
So this was really a good discussion, and I appreciated the fact that you actively listened to what Sarah presented. Your comments showed that. And staff has also been listening to what this group came forward with. And we have been looking at the zoning ordinance and what can we do to help with affordable housing. And you're going to see more changes coming forward than just the 40% administrative exception allowance. And I certainly hope that's something that you can support for those that can meet that affordable housing criteria. But there are changes that we're looking at that would have an impact on residential lots in these newer developments so that even our workforce housing demand can be met at a cost that maintains a level beyond what we're seeing today. Of course, supply and demand is a big factor. We've got so many plats coming in the door right now. You folks see them. But when it gets down to getting the firms to do the design work, hiring the contractors to get out in the field and build the infrastructure, everything's starting to backlog. We are just growing that fast right now. So there'll be more to come on that, and we certainly hope we have your support when we bring those ideas forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicki. Any planning commission items? All right, I'd look for a motion to adjourn. Rachel made the motion. Karen seconded that motion. All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye. Aye.